Austin was a bitter, controlling, and dark-minded corporate drone of an alpha. Yet, he had a beautiful, gentle beta wife who looked like a wealthy conglomerate heir straight out of a comic book, Carlos. Carlos was a full head taller than Austin. Even in a minimalist white shirt, he carried the perfect, tailored proportions of haute couture. Lowering his exquisite, flawless eyes, he kept their spotless home in absolute perfect order. If he weren't a beta, Austin would never be entirely worthy of him. The cold, ashen gossip around them always made Austin irritable. To assert his sovereignty, Austin habitually tilted his chin up, smashing vicious words against Carlos. You better not even think about divorce. Look at yourself. Other than me, what other alpha would even want you? Carlos always submissively lowered his head, letting his long eyelashes cast a docile shadow beneath his eyes, softly agreeing. Until one day, the word divorce tumbled out of Austin's parched lips first. The filter named warm and healing instantly collapsed, inch by inch. Accompanied by the freezing, crisp clatter of metal chains tightening around ankles, the originally obedient wife completely shredded his disguise. Carlos' sharp canines mercilessly bit right through the alpha's unripe, never-before-marked scent gland, branding an indelible, inerasible mark. Carlos' face was filled with absolute satiation. Using those well-jointed hands, he cupped Austin's completely dissociated face with extreme, almost agonizing tenderness. Tilting his head slightly, that young, exquisitely handsome face carried a sickening, pathological obsession. His voice was as soft as a sigh. Hubby, look at yourself right now. Besides me, what other dog out there is going to listen to you better than I do? Main text. Hubby, what are you thinking about? Carlos' voice was like a breeze brushing over spring water, effortlessly slicing through the chaotic background noise. Austin slowly lifted his head. The warm yellow streetlights shone from above, outlining Carlos' silhouette, which was slightly more than half a head taller than him. That floral apron, which should have looked entirely out of place, now rippled softly in the night wind. Carlos' hands were lightly clasped in front of him, gripping just hard enough to turn his knuckles a nervous pale pink. Moving his gaze up, a small orange hairpin was clipped to the side of his overly long bangs, unreservedly exposing those gentle, exquisite eyes to the dim, warm halo. This was a beta so beautiful, it almost felt like a jarring anomaly. But that didn't matter. In the flickering shadows of the street corner's neon lights, his colleague's alcohol-laced teasing still vibrated and buzzed against Austin's eardrums. Austin, man, who would have thought you were hiding such a gorgeous wife? It's just a shame, has a beta. Those words, who would have thought, morphed into sharp, freezing needles, instantly piercing through Austin's alcohol-numbed nerves. His oversized, thick, black-rimmed glasses slipped down the bridge of his nose, the lenses reflecting the gloom and pathetic misery deep within his eyes. He raised his slightly trembling fingertips, rubbed his tightly strung brow, and forced a stiff, rigid smile. Hubby. Carlos suddenly took a small half-step forward. Austin mumbled, swallowing his bitterness. He kept his mouth shut tight, having absolutely no intention of introducing them. Carlos didn't seem to mind. He turned his head directly, meeting the colleague's scrutinizing gaze. The arm he had rested on Austin's shoulder abruptly tightened. His searing hot chest pressed almost imperceptibly against Austin's through his thin shirt. Hubby, who is this? Carlos tilted his face slightly, his dense, long eyelashes casting a heavy, profound shadow beneath his eyes. Austin was just about to speak, but from the corner of his eye, he caught the colleague's gaze, a mix of scrutiny and outright disdain. A knot of suffocating, agitated heat instantly rushed to his head. He clenched his fists, his jawline locked tight, and coldly threw out a single word, colleague. With that, too exhausted to even offer a greeting, he turned straight around. We're going home. But Carlos backhandedly clamped down on his wrist. Wait, hubby. Aren't you going to say goodbye to your colleague? Austin instinctively looked back, only to crash straight into a profound, fathomless shadow. Carlos' towering frame adopted a posture of absolute protection, completely blocking the colleague's line of sight and entirely enveloping Austin within his own silhouette. Carlos tilted his head, a purely innocent smile rippling in the depths of his eyes. Hubby? Even though he was the one asking for a greeting, his body acted like an impenetrable wall, not yielding a single millimeter. The alcohol left Austin's brain in a chaotic fog. He gave up thinking and defeatedly lowered his eyelids. It's fine. We're not close. Hearing this, Carlos' tense shoulders instantly relaxed. He pursed his lips, revealing a shy, thoroughly satiated smile, before naturally hooking his arm back through Austin's. In the exact microsecond they touched, a dense, ruby-like, translucent halo spread out from Carlos, a visual anomaly triggered by the scent of pomegranate in the air. That blood-red halo aggressively invaded the space around Austin, wrapping him up airtight. Coupled with the blistering heat transmitting from his palm, it triggered an intense, blinding sensory tremor. In his daze, Austin only heard a brisk, incredibly gentle murmur beside his ear. "Okay, hubby." Austin ending up with Carlos was a complete accident. It happened across countless, suffocating afternoons of blind dates. His mother's pale but love-filled smile in the hospital room flashed back in his mind like shattered glass. As an alpha, he was forever surrounded only by a weak, dim, warm orange halo, the pathetic physical manifestation of his extremely low-grade, sickeningly sweet, and bland orange pheromones condensing in the air. He had no sports cars, only the same alternating plaid shirts day after day. He had no towering, terrifying, oppressive gravity, only thick bangs and the perpetually evasive gloomy eyes hiding behind thick black frames. The Omega sitting across from him either excused themselves politely or offered a disdainful cold sneer. Every single sound of a chair leg scraping the floor as they stood up was like a rusted, blunt knife, dragging back and forth across Austin's fragile ego. "Take your time, there's no rush. Our Austin is so wonderful, you will definitely find someone who loves you back." His mother's gentle gaze felt especially ethereal in these ash-gray memories. Until that day, the gears of fate quietly locked together inside a sun-dappled cafe. Sunlight pierced through the floor, to ceiling windows, illuminating every speck of dust in the air. Austin's Omega blind date had just left, and at the next table, another person, who had similarly been abandoned by their beta blind date, was covering their face tightly, their shoulders trembling slightly. It was Carlos. Austin stood frozen in place for a long time. Finally, dragging his heavy footsteps, he walked over and gently pushed a pack of tissues toward the man's hand. "Hello. This is for you." His voice was dry and tight. Carlos slowly lifted his head. In that pause of mere seconds, the originally restless dust motes in the air seemed to completely freeze. The only thing left was the pitiful, lingering crimson flush at the corners of his eyes. He reached out a fingertip, lightly pinching the edge of the tissue. The microsecond their fingertips brushed, a trace of a cool touch sparked through Austin's nerves like a faint electric current. "Thank you." Carlos looked up, his gaze locking directly and with absolute focus into the profound depths of Austin's pupils. "Am I that terrible?" He didn't even want to finish hearing what I had to say before he left. That low, aggrieved murmur was like a precision-cut key, twisting with a click to unlock the dust-covered chains on Austin's heart. The eyelashes behind his thick lenses trembled violently for a few seconds. Possessed by some phantom impulse, his mother's clumsy words of comfort tumbled out of his mouth. "It's fine. Take your time. There's no rush. You're so beautiful, you will definitely find someone who loves you back." Carlos tilted his head up slightly. The sunlight poured unreservedly onto his exquisite face, coating it in a fuzzy, warm gold edge of light. His gaze slid from Austin's evasive eyes, slowly, and with absolute meticulous precision, down to his tightly pressed lips. He picked up his water glass and took a sip, his Adam's apple bobbing gently on his long neck. Then, amidst the warm, tranquil light of the afternoon, the corners of Carlos' mouth pulled into a breathtaking, stunning smirk. The surrounding weak, warm orange halo that belonged to Austin seemed to receive some silent appeasement and bewitchment, beginning to dance restlessly and melt between the two of them. Carlos' voice was so low and soft, it felt like it could drip water, yet his gaze acted like pliant vines, tightly wrapping around the man in front of him. "I'll take your word for it." Sunlight pierced through the glass of the corner convenience store, overlapping Austin and Carlos' silhouettes time and time again. From the initial polite nods across a round table, to later walking shoulder to shoulder across crosswalks scattered with shattered gold sunlight. The scenes rapidly alternated within the warm gold halos, until freezing on Carlos' face incredibly close. His gaze was so focused it felt like it could melt the surrounding air. "What do you think? About me being your partner?" Austin nodded stiffly. The waveform on the hospital monitor finally leveled out. All the background noise dissolved into soft white noise, everything shifting toward a fuzzy, warm tone. However, shadows always breed in the warmest corners. In the company pantry, his colleagues' opening and closing lips were cut into blinding slow motion. So lucky, must have some dirt on him, if he weren't a beta. These fragmented noises transformed into threads of cold, ashen mist, pervasively eroding the seemingly warm sanctuary Austin had just managed to build. Wife. This was the first time Austin had called him that since they got married. The bedside lamp in the master bedroom radiated an orange halo like melted butter. Hearing this title, Carlos' pupils instantly dilated, his eyes reflecting the shattered starlight outside the window. "What's wrong, hubby?" Austin stiffly pulled up the corners of his mouth, his facial muscles twitching slightly. It was the exact curve he had practiced countless times in the mirror. He locked his grip on the corner of the soft, pure cotton blanket on the bed, his knuckles turning a blinding, ghastly white from excessive force. "Could you quit your job and stay home? I want to see you the second I come home." The moment those words fell, Austin held his breath. He was tormented almost to the point of suffocation by the churning desire for control deep within him. He stared dead at Carlos' face, waiting for a flash of disgust to cross those eyes, waiting for those exquisite features to twist. However, Carlos' clear vocal cords vibrated lightly. Not only did he not retreat, he actually lunged forward, pressing close. Carlos' warm neck nuzzled directly against Austin's chin, and a brisk murmur laced with a hidden excitement spilled from his throat. "Okay, hubby. I've wanted to do that for a long time." His vision was violently yanked back to reality. The bottom of the porcelain bowl lightly collided with the glass coffee table, letting out an incredibly crisp, faint clink. The sweet hot steam of the hangover soup spiraled upward under the soft light of the living room floor lamp, blurring his vision. Austin slumped onto the soft, massive fabric sofa, yet his mind played like a stuck tape, filled entirely with the way that new colleague, Edwin, had stared dead at Carlos during the dinner. The air around him began to faintly burn. His extremely low-grade orange pheromones now manifested as murky, sticky, dark orange spots of light, flickering restlessly and irritably within the cozy living room. "Hubby, what are you thinking about?" Carlos half crouched beside the coffee table. Seeing Austin unresponsive for so long, the faint smile that usually felt like a spring breeze froze slightly at the corner of his mouth. Carlos softened his breathing, his voice as gentle as cotton candy that would shatter at a touch. "Are you thinking about that colleague from today?" "Why did you suddenly come pick me up today?" Austin interrupted coldly. The jawbone jutted out in a distinct silhouette from his violent clenching. Carlos' eyelashes trembled violently. Wearing a pure white knit loungewear set, he looked entirely soft and defenseless. "I saw you hadn't come home so late. I was a little worried." Austin irritably rubbed the space between his brows. The dark orange spots of light in the air warped even more violently, as if attempting to tear this peaceful night apart. "Don't just come pick me up whenever you feel like it next time." "Why?" "There is no why." Austin violently raised his voice. As his chest heaved, the dark orange light instantly expanded, like a heavy suffocating wool blanket pressing dead against the surroundings. He stared dead at Carlos' face, which remained blindingly pale and radiant, even in plain clothes, and blurted out, "Even though you're a beta, you're married. I don't demand you stay home and raise kids like an Omega, but can you at least stay indoors more often? I work so hard for this family, and you can't even manage this one little thing." Dead silence fell over the living room. The highlight in Carlos' eyes seemed to flicker violently. He lowered his head slightly, his overly long bangs casting a profound shadow over his eyes. When he spoke again, his voice was significantly deeper than usual, carrying an almost imperceptible tremor. "If I don't do this, will hubby divorce me?" "Divorce?" Austin violently spiked his volume. His trembling fingertips pointed straight at the other man, his words slicing through the warm light around them like freezing razor blades. "You better not even think about divorce. Look at yourself right now. Besides me, what other alpha out there would even want you?" The moment the words fell, Carlos blinked his eyes slowly, a long blink. Then, his originally rigid, tense shoulders actually began to relax, inch by visible inch. "That's good." "What?" Austin hadn't heard clearly. Carlos didn't answer again. He slowly stood up, barefoot, stepping across the soft carpet toward the sofa. Accompanying his approach, a dense, profound scent of pomegranate bled out, the residual aroma from his shower. This scent carried an incredibly greedy, yet profoundly gentle accommodating power, like the highest tier heavy velvet. It effortlessly swallowed Austin's frantic, murky, dark orange light hole. Carlos sat right next to Austin. Like a bird finally returning to its nest, he submissively and affectionately buried his head deep into Austin's chest. His arms, like growing vines, wrapped around Austin's waist, pulling tighter and tighter. Through the thin shirt, Austin could clearly feel that overbearing body temperature and the breath pressing right against his heart. Carlos' voice was sticky, entangled, thoroughly melting into this blinding deep red halo and soft embrace. I know. Besides hubby, what other alpha could possibly like me this much? For days, the air in the company corridors felt bizarre. The intern, Edwin, acted like a startled rabbit, rapidly dodging away the second he saw Austin. In order to stop the bleeding on their work efficiency, Austin had no choice but to corner the handsome young man in the cafe downstairs after work. The afternoon sunlight filtered through the blinds, illuminating Edwin's young, exquisitely contoured face so brightly there was nowhere to hide. Wearing an impeccably tailored, slim-fit shirt that outlined his straight posture, he was currently looking down awkwardly. His long fingers were dead, locked onto the edge of his coffee cup. Austin habitually pushed up his heavy black-rimmed glasses and forced a polite smile. "Edwin, can we talk?" "Oh, okay, Austin," Edwin answered frantically. A searing hot crimson rapidly spread across the tips of his pale ears. He even swallowed back the familiar brother he usually used. There was no unnecessary small talk. Edwin stared at the rapidly swirling coffee in his hand, his gaze flickering unsteadily. "Austin, why do you wear glasses?" "Because I'm nearsighted." Oh, nearsighted is good, nearsighted is good." Edwin seemed to have unloaded some massive burden. Just as Austin closed his eyes, pinching the bridge of his nose and doubting the necessity of this entire conversation, a hurried rustle of clothing sounded from across the table. Edwin violently threw his head up. Those clear, highly aggressive young eyes crashed straight into him, carrying a probe that was practically bursting out. "Austin, do you like betas?" Just as he thought. The oxygen in Austin's chest seemed to be vacuumed out instantly. The pathetic, thin, warm, orange halo surrounding him shook violently and anxiously in the air, like a candle in the wind. He looked at the overly handsome beta in front of him, sneering inwardly. "Just as I thought. It's because he saw Carlos at the dinner. It's just that I saw sister-in-law is a beta, but you alphas have ruts." "No, I mean, I'm also a beta." Edwin eagerly leaned forward, even the rhythm of his breathing turning heavy. The abrupt vibration of a phone hit like a heavy sledgehammer, instantly cutting off Edwin's unfinished sentence. Carlos' name danced across the screen. "Hubby, what time are you coming back today?" Upon answering, Carlos' warm, gentle voice flowed smoothly through the earpiece. Even though they were far apart, Austin hallucinated that the surrounding air was being dyed a profound, dense ruby red inch by inch. Austin's knuckles turned slightly white as he gripped the phone. His Adam's apple bobbed with immense difficulty before he even had time to weave a lie. "Why aren't you speaking?" A layer of light, airy laughter bled into Carlos' voice. It slid past Austin's ear like silk, yet carried a suffocating entanglement. "You weren't having dinner with your colleagues again, are you? Or maybe you have a date with someone else tonight?" Austin threw his eyes up violently. Across the coffee table, Edwin had stopped stirring at some point. He sat perfectly straight, his gaze sticking dead onto Austin's phone like physical glue. Or rather, through that freezing device, he was frantically coveting the owner whose very voice oozed exquisite perfection. In an instant, a massive sense of agitation manifested into a tangible shadow, enveloping Austin. He lowered his heavy eyelids, using the reflection of his lenses to block out the churning hostility in his eyes. He lied stiffly into the phone. "No. I'll be back soon." Before another syllable could even sound from the other end, he decisively killed the call. When he pushed open the front door, the warm-toned chandelier overhead cascaded down a cozy halo like melted butter, dressing the apartment's dining room like a healing scene straight out of a movie. Carlos arranged the steaming food on the dining table. Then, naturally pulling out a chair, He sat right next to Austin at such an extremely close distance that their thighs were practically touching. Accompanying his approach, a dense, sticky blood-red halo, like a fully ripe ruby, acted like top-tier, heavy velvet. Forcefully and undeniably, it wrapped Austin up airtight. Hubby has been coming home so late these past few days. Carlos picked up a piece of food with his chopsticks and placed it into Austin's bowl. Wearing soft light-colored loungewear, his delicate, exquisite eyes were slightly lowered, his long eyelashes casting soft shadows beneath them. His tone carried a familiar, whining pout. Working overtime at the company these past few days. Austin chewed stiffly. Subconsciously, he didn't even want the name Edwin to dirty Carlos' ears. He stared dead at Carlos' flawless face right beside him. The light hitting his pale cheek even illuminated the layer of soft, fine peach fuzz. What exactly did a person this beautiful and exquisite see in him? Could anyone just come along, hand him a pack of tissues, and easily steal this tenderness away? Just like that young man with the manic eyes in the cafe. The inferiority and panic within him instantly fermented into a sharp, piercing blade. Why are you being so sensitive? Austin violently slammed his chopsticks down, the porcelain clattering with an incredibly harsh, crisp sound. He stared coldly at Carlos. The irritable, warm orange spots of light around him darted and expanded chaotically in the air. I already told you it was just overtime. You overthink every little thing. It's not like you're an Omega. Is it really necessary? The air abruptly froze solid beneath those incredibly vicious, hurtful words. A full half-minute passed, before Carlos slowly reached out his long hand, his cool fingertips gently climbing onto Austin's forearm. He kept his head down, his thick, long eyelashes trembling violently. A crystal-clear tear hung precariously on his lash, threatening to fall. Even his voice leaked with fragmented grievance. Hubby, I just wanted to ask if you were tired. Austin looked away pathetically, lowering his eyelids. All right. In this dead, silent coziness, a massive sorrow drowned him. Carlos was a beta. He couldn't feel the pull of pheromones. He couldn't see the dark light of outside covetousness. The only one who was truly sensitive, paranoid, inferior, yet arrogant, had always been Austin himself. Is a marriage between an alpha and a beta truly suitable? Sinking into the abyss of self-loathing, he stared blankly at the lavish spread on the table, lost in thought. And precisely because of this, he completely failed to see, right beside him, Carlos, who just a moment ago had been so aggrieved he was on the verge of tears, was currently lifting his head slowly, inch by inch. Under the warm, yellow, healing light, every trace of fragility and submissiveness instantly, cleanly vanished from that exquisitely beautiful face. Carlos' eyes, which were usually brimming with warmth, were now pinned greedily to the back of Austin's neck. And the profound red halo surrounding him, representing his scent, not only did it show absolutely no sign of weakening from grievance, it was actually adopting an almost manic posture, baring its fangs and claws as it completely strangled and swallowed Austin's faint orange spots of light whole. Where was there even half a trace of a pitiful look? The sound of keyboard typing gradually ceased in the cozy living room. Austin rubbed his aching eye sockets and took off his heavy black-rimmed glasses. Losing the refraction of the lenses, everything around him instantly transformed into fuzzy, warm, but out-of-focus blocks of color. Hazy steam rose in the bathroom. Perhaps due to extreme exhaustion, Austin's fingers slipped slightly, pressing down a double pump of body wash. In an instant, the warm, incandescent light on the bathroom ceiling seemed to be covered by a heavy, sticky, ruby red filter. That blood-red halo flowed with the warm water, transforming into a visible, concentrated mist of light. Thread by thread, it drilled into his respiratory tract, twisting his brain into a dizzy, extremely oxygen-deprived stupor. It must be the back-to-back overtime these past few days, making me too tired. Austin stumbled as he pushed open the bedroom door, relying on muscle memory to crash into the depths of the soft, warm blankets. The moment he closed his eyes, the world fell into a bizarre, grotesque red haze. Hubby. An incredibly low, incredibly soft call brushed past his ear. Immediately following, a ball of hot breath swept past the sensitive tip of Austin's ear like a spring breeze, instantly igniting a scorching crimson flush there. Through this suffocating dizziness, Austin struggled to pry open a sliver of an eye. In the haze, he could only make out the man's soft, choppy bangs. What is it? What should we do, hubby? Before Austin's sluggish brain could even begin to process, Carlos' high nose bridge closed in without warning. With extreme precision, it gently nuzzled against that underdeveloped alpha scent gland. This seemingly affectionate touch instantly triggered an uncontrollable tremor through Austin's entire body. Blood-engorged red spots rapidly bloomed around the gland. Hubby, has your rut come early again? Carlos' voice was brimming with a worry that was practically overflowing. However, in stark contrast to his anxious tone were his methodical, entirely unpanicked movements. With a scalp-numbing precision, his cool thumb repeatedly pressed heavily and scraped against the beat, red gland. Every single pull brought about an uncontrollable shudder from Austin. Ultimately, Austin's tightly clenched fingers were forcefully pried open one by one. Then, with fingers intertwined, Carlos dead locked his hand onto the soft mattress. Before his consciousness completely sank, the cozy orange bedside lamp in the bedroom had been entirely swallowed by an abyss, like deep red anomaly. Carlos' murmurs were like melted syrup, thickly coating Austin's eardrums. Hubby, why did you lie today? You obviously didn't come home late because of overtime? Oh, I know. He must have been clinging to you, right? It's true. Some people are just good at pretending. Hubby, you were just bewitched by him. I hate the way he looks at you. You won't like him either, right? Within that bone, chillingly gentle sleep, talk, Carlos lowered his head. Within that oppressive, deep red halo, a highly aggressive, terrifying tension belonging strictly to an apex predator was suddenly exposed. Hubby, didn't you say you liked it best when I was obedient? If that's the case, why can't you just look at me and only me forever? Is it only if I mark? No, you would definitely be angry with me. It's fine. As long as hubby stays with me forever, it's fine. I will deal with anyone else who covets you. All the sounds were rapidly fading away. Austin could only feel that lingering cool touch on his cheek, like precision calipers measuring his own property. The murmuring stopped. A satisfied, soft sigh came from above. Hubby, you're so good. Accompanying that sigh, the pitifully scarce, dim, warm orange spots of light inside Austin were completely lured out. But before they could even flicker in the air, they were effortlessly strangled, swallowed, and assimilated by the dense, tsunami-like sea of ruby light surrounding him. When he opened his eyes again, the digital clock on the nightstand flashed 0230. A full 2 hours. The healing orange light illuminated the bedroom. Carlos was sitting quietly on the edge of the bed, his head slightly lowered, using a wet wipe to meticulously and slowly clean every single crease in his palm. That soft, beautiful profile looked incredibly quiet and holy in the warm light. The lower the grade of an alpha, the more frequent and erratic their ruts. A ridiculous thought flashed through Austin's subconscious. High-tier enigmas can also deliberately induce an alpha's heat. But he quickly dismissed it, blaming all this loss of control on that young beta who was likely coveting his wife. Austin quietly watched Carlos' calm profile. A full minute passed before he suddenly spoke, his voice hoarse. Wife, let me help you out too, okay? Visibly, Carlos' thin back violently stiffened for a microsecond. But in just 1 second, he turned his head. That flawless face wore an impenetrable look of innocence, his long eyelashes fluttering. Why so sudden, hubby? Otherwise, you're always the only one helping me. Austin forced a strained tug at the corner of his lips. The thick lenses flashed with a faint light in the dark. Can't I help you too? Carlos didn't hesitate. Like a bird seeking sanctuary, he dove headfirst into Austin's embrace. He buried his face deep into that broad chest, his hands wrapping around Austin's waist with extreme naturalness. It was a long time before a muffled, heavily dependent voice came out. Hubby, you're so good to me. But never mind. You're so busy every day, and besides, you're the one in your rut. It's what I should do. This again. An airtight, flawless rejection as always. Whenever Austin tried to cross that hidden boundary, what greeted him was always this impenetrable mask of docility. Austin slowly lowered his eyelids, his gaze landing on the top of the fluffy head in his arms. His Adam's apple bobbed with extreme difficulty, and ultimately those interrogations were swallowed right back into his stomach. Union without a mark. An ethereal sense of security. Stagnant physical intimacy. Carlos' net, woven of docility and love, was constructed so perfectly, so softly, wrapping him airtight within this seemingly warm and healing dream. Yet, once the spark of suspicion fell upon this seemingly peaceful, dry kindling, it would only take a gentle breeze to ignite a wildfire that would burn the prairie to the ground. The night wind slipped through the gaps between the high rises, rippling the cold light of the phone screen. "When are you coming back?" At 3 a.m., this solitary, ice-cold question lay alone in the chat. Gone was the usual, honey-laced prefix of hubby. Austin lowered his thick eyelashes. The faint glow of the screen illuminated his pale, fine jawline, outlining the coldness and alienation he had deliberately built up over the past half-month. "Austin, man, what's wrong? Did you get into a fight with sister-in-law?" Edwin leaned in. Half a month of back work had stripped this young beta of his initial fanatic facade. Now, wearing an impeccably tailored, deep blue bespoke suit, he slouched casually against the desk, winking and offering comfort that clearly had schadenfreude written all over it. Austin expressionlessly locked the screen, forcefully suppressing all churning emotions, his voice cold and hard. "It's nothing. Are you that free? Summarize the business trip project." "Oh, come on," Edwin wailed. He violently straightened his tall frame, his young face filled with absolute certainty. "Bro, I have a way to help you win back sister-in-law's heart." The color palette of the scene abruptly flipped under the harsh fluorescent lights of the hair salon, the pacing instantly accelerating. Running water, the snip of scissors. When the final heavy lock of bangs that obstructed his vision fell, when those black-rimmed glasses, which had acted like a seal, were completely removed, the image in the mirror seemed to have been meticulously re-sculpted by a master artist. Time hadn't left a single trace of exhaustion on his face. Instead, after washing away the dull disguise, an astonishing youth and handsomeness erupted. Exquisite, flawless features were entirely exposed to the light. Because he was wearing contact lenses for the first time, the corners of his eyes bore a fragile, captivating shade of crimson. Even with a tight-lipped expression, his slightly upturned eyes possessed a natural, breathtaking allure. The tailored, crisp French, collared shirt perfectly outlined his broad shoulders and narrow waist. "I just purely like beautiful things," Edwin yelled excitedly next to the mirror, pointing at the reflection to desperately prove his innocence. "Bro, you obviously fit my aesthetic standards way better, alright?" Austin stared blankly at himself in the mirror. The faint, almost imperceptible warm, orange halo surrounding him seemed to have been dusted off in this moment, glowing just a bit brighter. Perhaps he really should be brave for once. Take the flowers, stand in front of Carlos, and listen to his explanation. The light and shadow of the scene were rapidly sliced by the cold white moonlight. Downstairs in the old residential complex, the shadows of the trees danced. Holding a bouquet of fiery red roses, Austin stepped over the shattered, silver moonlight. However, his initially brisk footsteps were nailed dead to the spot the moment he clearly saw the silhouettes by the flower bed. Carlos was standing extremely close to a tall man. That man was wearing an impeccably tailored, pure black bespoke suit. Even in the darkness, that sharp, cold jawline was unmistakable. It was the very beta who had sat across from Carlos on that blind date and snatched the opportunity first. Who knows if he has a partner? A mad dog that bites everywhere during its rut. What beta would willingly let their scent gland be bitten? The murmuring voices from the depths of his mind morphed into a sharp ringing in his ears, instantly shredding the courage Austin had fought so hard to build. He gripped the stems of the roses in a deathlock until his fingertips were pierced. The warm orange spots of light around him, which had finally managed to brighten, shrank and froze violently in the night wind, turning into cold, ashen powder. He didn't step forward to interrogate. With a ghastly pale face, he dragged his numb legs and faded like a ghost into the pitch black stairwell where the motion's sensor light had failed. What Austin didn't know was that over this past half-month, the space behind that door had long since transformed into a terrifying, suffocating scarlet storm. It was an extreme, tyrannical rut belonging strictly to an Enigma. There was not a single source of light in the room, only a thick, deep, ruby light mist that practically dripped blood, saturating the air. At the epicenter of that sea of light was a nest built entirely of Austin's unwashed clothes. Carlos' young, flawless face was buried deep within the fabrics, carrying a faint orange scent. He wasn't wearing his elegant loungewear. His thin silk shirt was violently wrinkled, the collar thrown wide open. He panted heavily, greedily sucking in that pitiful orange halo. Behind him, the deep red anomaly writhed and expanded frantically like vines completely out of control. "Hubby, when are you coming back?" He couldn't send a voice message. He was terrified that his hoarse, horrifying voice would completely destroy the gentle beta image he had painstakingly crafted. He could only stare at the photo sent by his assistant, the intimate backs of Edwin, in his crisp suit, walking shoulder to shoulder with Austin on the streets of another city. The venom of jealousy coursed through his veins. The exact second he heard his assistant report, Austin and Edwin went shopping after work. Carlos didn't hesitate for a microsecond to inject a freezing, highly potent suppressant straight into his blood. The agonizing pain made him violently throw back his long, graceful neck. The veins on his forehead bulged, and sweat slid down his extremely high nose bridge. The tyrannical, deep red anomaly surrounding him, under the absolute crushing suppression of the drug, was forced to let out a teeth, grinding, shrieking vibration, forcefully compressed and reined right back under his young, exquisitely handsome skin. "I think you really want your salary docked." Downstairs, Carlos took the empty case from his bespoke suited assistant. A gentle smile hung on his lips, yet his eyes were a bottomless, dead, silent abyss. Looking at this beautiful but bone-chillingly terrifying face, the assistant swallowed all words of dissuasion. Time and space reconverged in this moment. Heavy, sluggish footsteps stopped outside the door. Carlos took a deep breath, instantly retracting every sharp edge. Swapping in that exhausted yet soft smile he had rehearsed 1,000 times, he threw the door open. The old orange light of the corridor cascaded down, illuminating the person outside. Carlos' breathing stalled violently. Gone were the irritating black, rimmed glasses. Gone was the sloppy disguise. The Austin standing outside the door was as handsome as a drawn, priceless blade. His exquisite, detailed features radiated a breathtaking magnetism under the warm light. And even more blinding was the bouquet of roses in his arms, so red they seemed to be on fire. The assistant's words exploded in his mind. They went shopping. The deep red anomaly in the depths of Carlos' eyes churned violently. Before he locked it down. He pulled up a flawless smile, the curve of his eyes calculated to absolute perfection. Deliberately ignoring that overly stunning face, his voice was soft and light. "Hubby, are these flowers for me?" Austin looked at him coldly. There was absolutely no temperature in those beautiful reddened eyes. He brushed right past Carlos, walking straight into the apartment, and casually tossed the roses onto the spotless dining table. Then, he turned around. The crisp suit outlined his cold, rigid lines. Carlos Austin's voice was very soft, yet in an instant, it vacuumed all the oxygen out of the room. "Let's get a divorce." The exact microsecond those words fell, the smile on Carlos' face completely froze. The orange light disguise, named warm and healing, shattered inch by inch in this moment. Starting from Carlos' feet, an extremely dense, suffocating ruby, red anomaly like a breached sea of blood, completely shredded its suppressing chains. With a terrifying posture that crushed absolutely everything in its path, it instantly swallowed the entire room whole. "What?" Carlos tilted his head slightly, as if he genuinely hadn't heard clearly. Immediately after, with a soft click, the front door was dead, locked shut. He advanced step by step, the distance between them instantly shrinking to a highly dangerous threshold. Carlos lowered his thick eyelashes, concealing every churning emotion in his eyes. His voice was as soft as a falling feather. "Hubby, what did you just say?" I said, "We are getting a Devo," before the word could settle. Austin's lips were viciously blocked by an extremely domineering, absolute force. "Hubby, what did you say?" "I didn't hear you clearly." Carlos murmured right against his swollen lips. His tone remained tender, yet it bled with a bone, chilling obsession. Accompanying this murmur, the surrounding air began to warp violently. This was the pheromone anomaly of a true apex predator. Countless deep, red liquid ruby, like dense fogs, erupted from Carlos, like living vines, instantly dead, locking Austin in their coils. Under this terrifying, crushing gravity, the pitifully scarce warm orange spots of light inside Austin were completely dragged out, overflowing uncontrollably from his scent gland, only to be mercilessly pulverized and devoured the second they touched the deep, red fog. Austin's brain fell back into a terrifying, dizzy stupor. But he finally realized that this was absolutely not the power a beta should possess. He desperately bent his elbows, pressing them dead against Carlos' shoulders, trying to force some distance between them. Entirely futile. Carlos effortlessly pinned Austin's hands behind his back, biting down on his earlobe, which had flushed red from resistance. His eyes half closed, his hot breath fanned against the side of Austin's neck, his tone even carrying a trace of distress. "Hubby, I've thought about it for a long time. Why are you angry with me? So angry you even want to divorce me now?" Thinking it over and over. It seems it was because that day I didn't let you help. Carlos' long fingers forcefully gripped Austin's chin, forcing him to look up. A dark, red storm was boiling inside those beautiful eyes, yet his tone was so gentle it was terrifying. "Hubby, you really should have told me earlier." The soft moonlight slipped through the unsealed gap in the curtains, casting a cold silver beam onto the carpet. This beam of light became the sole spectator to this absolute madness. Carlos' movements showed absolutely no mercy. With extreme focus, he observed Austin's expression, which was breaking down from pain and some hidden twisted stimulation, while methodically and slowly interrogating him. "Hubby, why did you want a divorce?" Austin bit down hard on his lower lip. Carlos didn't seem to need his answer anyway, falling into a bizarre loop of talking to himself. "Is it because of that beta? But he can't mark you. Hez so useless. How could you possibly divorce me because of him? You used to be a beta too. You couldn't mark me either." Provoked to the point of absolute breakdown by those words, Austin covered his eyes fiercely with his arm, avoiding Carlos' blistering gaze, and roared furiously. "Who said that?" Carlos let out a soft chuckle. He gently stroked Austin's sweat-drenched cheek as if stating an incredibly absurd universal truth. "Hubby, your entire body has been soaked in my pomegranate scent for a long time." "That was body wash," Austin retorted, panting heavily. Carlos just smiled and didn't speak. The profound red anomaly surrounding them thickened several degrees with his smile, transforming into an impenetrable airtight net. It wasn't until this exact moment that Austin belatedly realized that the so-called pomegranate-scented body wash had, from the very beginning, been a meticulously woven lie. This psychopath. But he absolutely never expected that something even more psychopathic was yet to come. The following few days, for Austin, were an endless cycle so long it nearly shattered his concept of time. Cold, heavy metal chains wrapped around his ankles. Every struggle was accompanied by a harsh, crisp clatter. That alpha scent gland, unripe and shrunken due to his low grade, was repeatedly pierced, bitten, and utterly marked by the top-tier Enigma's sharp canines. All resistance was ruthlessly suppressed by that frantic tide of deep, red pheromones. His tears ran dry, his voice went hoarse from screaming, yet it couldn't buy even a single ounce of pity from the man on top of him. Even when Austin was pushed past his absolute limit, breaking down and repeating the words of love Carlos wanted to hear over and over again, the plundering never stopped. Instead, when it was finally nearing the end, Carlos would act like a completely different person. His face full of satiation, he would adopt the most gentle posture to affectionately cup Austin's tear-stained, unfocused face, lightly kissing the red marks left from his struggles. "Hubby, look at yourself right now. Besides me, what other dog out there is going to listen to you better than I do?" Austin was forced to miss work for a full 5 days. 3 days trapped and tossed around in the deep, red storm. 2 days lying in bed, recovering like a broken rag doll. Over these 5 absurd days, all of Austin's psychological defenses were entirely pulverized. Those dark, despicable, hidden thoughts about jealousy and the agonizing fear of loss were completely forced out by Carlos, spilled word for word. And as an exchange, upon hearing these confessions, Carlos grew so excited he nearly lost control again. He took the initiative to confess everything, how he and Enigma had masqueraded as a beta, and his insane surveillance over the past half-month. The misunderstanding was resolved in a highly twisted, yet utterly absolute manner. The air in the master bedroom finally began to circulate again. Carlos rested his chin on one hand, lying on his side next to Austin. The corners of his eyes and brows were hung with the arrogant triumph of pure satiation. So, in hubby's eyes, that popular... Austin stared expressionlessly at the ceiling. He genuinely wanted to strangle his past self, the one who thought Carlos was a gentle, delicate little beta wife. He wanted to roll over and ignore this lunatic, but was terrified that exposing his fragile back to the man would invite a new attack. He could only lie completely straight and rigid on the bed. Seeing this, Carlos instantly glued himself to Austin like he had no bones. Lying on his side, his arms locked firmly around Austin's waist, he morphed back into that clinging little bird. His voice was sickeningly sweet, but in my eyes, hubby is also very attractive. You're the only one who thinks so. Austin closed his eyes, too exhausted to deal with him. Carlos was instantly unhappy. He propped up his upper body, his tone extremely serious as he began counting on his fingers to refute him. A lot of people think so. When I went to pick you up from the company before, so many people's eyes were glued to you, you just didn't notice. They tried to belittle you by elevating a stranger like me, but it was just a pathetic attempt to grab your attention. Really, it just made their intentions look ridiculous. After all, you're so outstanding, reliable, calm, and you look so good. Accompanied by Carlos' rapid-fire machine gun. Like compliments, the tips of Austin's ears uncontrollably began to burn, the red flush rapidly spreading to his cheeks. All right, that's enough. Unable to endure it any longer, Austin clamped his hand right over Carlos' endlessly chattering mouth. The room finally quieted down. They just held each other quietly like this. After a while, Carlos moved Austin's hand away. That fluffy head nuzzled affectionately against the crook of Austin's neck. Then, he tilted his head up slightly. Those eyes that were usually brimming with laughter were now as profound as a whirlpool, his tone carrying an almost imperceptible trace of fragility. Hubby. Now the mad dog who bites everywhere during his rut is me. You can't abandon me. A sudden ache violently seized Austin's heart. His eyes burned. He blinked rapidly a few times, and finally, within that warm, orange halo that had once again become cozy, he let out an incredibly soft sigh. Carlos POV Extra. I once told Austin that I fell in love with him at first sight in that cafe. He glanced at me then, his eyes writing out his absolute disbelief. But I wasn't lying to him. It's just that long before what he thought was our first encounter, fate had already finalized the script. An Enigma's developmental period is much later than an ordinary alpha's. It wasn't until my freshman year of college that I experienced my first rut as a top-tier apex predator. That feeling was absolute hell. Violent, tyrannical pheromones rampaged through my body. The deep, red anomaly practically burned my sanity to ash. The excruciating pain made it impossible to walk to the infirmary. I could only find an empty study room, lock myself inside, and then fall into a complete coma. In that suffocating feeling of near death, I felt like I was plunging into an endless, blood-colored abyss, until a very, very faint scent of orange pierced through that mist of blood. It was a scent so weak it was almost negligible, yet it acted like a soft hand, miraculously appeasing my berserk pheromones. When I opened my eyes again, I was already lying on a pristine white bed in the school infirmary. You're awake? A somewhat muffled voice sounded beside the bed. I turned my head and saw an alpha with long bangs and heavy black-rimmed glasses. It was Austin. He clearly hadn't memorized my face, which had been twisted by the rut. Seeing me awake, he simply kept a straight face, used an incredibly rigid tone to instruct me on some rut precautions, and then turned and left without a single trace of attachment. At the time, I only thought the scent was nice, and held a sliver of gratitude toward him. Until one day, much later, that familiar faint orange scent drifted through the air once again. Like a beast triggered by imprinting, I violently whipped my head around following the scent. Through the crystal clear floor to ceiling glass of the cafe, I saw Austin. He was sitting by the window, staring intensely at his laptop screen. After a long while, probably feeling his eyes ache, he raised his hand and took off those black-rimmed glasses that acted like a mask. He rubbed the bridge of his nose and leaned back, looking somewhat exhausted. At that exact moment, the sunlight pierced through the clouds, spilling unobstructed onto his completely unshielded features. Slightly upturned eyes, a straight nose bridge, and lips slightly parted in relaxation. I can no longer find the words to describe the shock I felt then. I only remember a breeze carrying the warmth of the sun blowing past, and the wind chimes hanging from the cafe's eaves letting out a crisp cling. That crisp sound perfectly overlapped with the beating of my heart. From that microsecond on, I knew I was going to have him. So, I meticulously orchestrated that chance encounter. In the cafe, my beta assistant sat across from me, maintaining a polite but rigid smile, lowering his voice to ask Mr. Carlos, what do we do next? I didn't look at him, just slightly raised my eyes. Diagonally in front of me, Austin's back was turned to me. He couldn't see my gaze, sticky like a spiderweb, dead, locking onto that exposed sliver of pale nape. Wait until his Omega blind date leaves and then you leave too. I issued the command coldly. Even though my assistant's face screamed confusion, he still complied. The scene that followed went so smoothly I almost wanted to laugh. Once Austin's blind date left, I immediately covered my face with both hands, my shoulders shaking slightly, feigning the look of absolute heartbroken devastation after being abandoned. I was gambling on whether the owner of that warm, orange-scented pheromone had a heart just as soft. Soon enough, soft footsteps stopped beside my ear. Hello, this is for you. The voice I had desperately yearned for, finally, in this moment rang out clearly just for me. Since the prey had voluntarily walked into the trap, I slowly lifted my head. In the exact second I took the tissue, I deliberately let my fingertips brush ambiguously against his cool skin. I stared dead into those evasive eyes hiding behind the thick lenses. Thank you. Seeing the tips of his ears flush red from being entirely flustered, I could barely suppress the manic, rising curve of the corners of my mouth. I could only use the most gentle, most harmless voice to righteously declare his absolute belonging. I'll take your word for it. Hubby, you were the one who provoked me first.
And with that, the story comes to a close. Austin has finally seen the true face of his gentle, obedient beta wife. But I believe that in that exact moment of realization, Austin must have felt both overjoyed and deeply relieved. As an extremely low-grade alpha, the foundation of Austin's personality is built on pathological inferiority and extreme sensitivity. He is accustomed to hiding himself behind thick, black, rimmed glasses and overly long bangs to minimize his presence. Because he firmly believes he is unworthy of love, he suffers from an agonizing, constant fear of loss. To grasp at a pathetic sense of security, he exhibits an overwhelming desire for control, even selfishly demanding Carlos quit his job and stay home, just to sever all covetous stares from the outside world. His words are often like poison-laced blades. He habitually uses degrading rhetoric like, "Who else would want you besides me to beat Carlos down?" Yet, this seemingly high and mighty domination is, in reality, nothing more than a bluff masking his absolute terror of being abandoned. When he saw Carlos standing with another handsome man, he lacked even the courage to confront him face to face. He only dared to use the coldest, most resolute divorce to escape the humiliation he thought he was about to face. But he never expected Carlos to be so utterly obsessed with him. Carlos is completely different from Austin. As a top-tier Enigma, Carlos is a paranoid obsessive who excels at disguise. He possesses formidable patience and an astonishing, chilling composure. To capture his desired prey, he didn't hesitate to retract all the sharp edges of an apex predator, pretending to be a fragile, easily bullied beta who had failed a blind date. He even willingly put on a floral apron, playing the role of a submissive, delicate wife who provided flawless emotional value. In the shadows, however, he ruthlessly monitored and eliminated all potential competitors. He wove an airtight net out of docility and dependency, yet absolute possessiveness flowed deep within his very bones. The exact microsecond Austin asked for a divorce, Carlos' calm self, restraint was entirely shattered. Unable to hold back any longer, he finally exposed his true colors. Hearing Austin confess his possessiveness over him from his own mouth, Carlos must have been excited to the point of absolute madness. And upon finally discovering Carlos' manic obsession with him, Austin's hollow heart must have been completely filled. It has to be said, the two are a truly perfect match. Their souls are remarkably synchronized. I firmly believe that under the nourishment of Carlos' love, Austin will eventually find his own brilliant, true self.